Today on The State of Us, gender in sports and what to do about it. Welcome to The State of Us. I'm your host, Justin T. Weller, joined, of course, by the friendly redneck liberal and senior resident historian here at True Chat, Mr. Lance L. Jackson. Today, as a New York Times article reads, trans swimmer revives an old debate in elite sports. What defines a woman? For nearly a century, that's right, for nearly 100 years, certain elite athletes have been subject to all manner of anatomical, hormonal, and other testing to compete in women's events. Today, we're going to look at what states are doing across the United States. What exactly does it mean to be transgender? And how does that fit into sports, particularly competitive sports? And more importantly, what to do about it? Because that's where the debate is raging. The two sides ban transgender participation outright, force people to play in the sport they were based on the sex they were assigned at birth, or the other side of just let everybody do whatever they want. Well, if you're like most Americans, you're probably not exactly sure what to do. And that's what Lance and I are here to try to navigate today. So Lance, what is the word of the day?
Well, the word of the day is conundrum. Conundrum, 3 syllables, conundrum. It's a noun. Second definition is the one we're using today. Any puzzling question or problem. And this issue is a real conundrum for me because it brings up two of my greatest passions, and that is equality and athletics. And they're running headlong into one another. And in all honesty, I am struggling mightily to find where I am on this, because the more I read, the more I try to understand, the more I don't have the definitive answer as to what to do.
It's a tricky one, because I think there's a lot of Americans out there, Lance, who feel like, on the one hand, they may not necessarily understand what it means to be transgender, but they generally feel like they want people to be able to live the life that makes them happy, right? And I think we've been on the record a lot of times of saying that, for the most part, that's how you and I feel. If somebody can live in a way that makes them happy, that doesn't materially harm other human beings, then we're generally for that. And I think a lot of people are. On the other hand, this is where part of the problem comes in. Sports is interwoven into American society. And for a lot of people, it's a substantive part of their life, even if they don't play, right? They may very much enjoy, and it may be a regular source of entertainment, watching sports, rooting for their team, going to events, making days out of it, spending money at local businesses because of it, and on and on and on, right? So sports is an industry, in addition to being a, type or referring to a set of activities. It is very much a major economic component, at least in the United States. So I think that's part of what makes it tricky, is this isn't some obscure thing, right, where people are like, yeah, that doesn't really affect me, so I just don't care. Do whatever you want. People tend to have an opinion about this, and I think it's important that we're honest with folks about. I don't think Lance and I feel like we have a strong, definitive answer on what to do about this. So I think we just want to be upfront about that. What we're going to endeavor to do today is we found two good pieces, I think, from the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal. So we tried to kind of, as we do with our two sources, sort of share those perspectives that sort of outline for us why this issue is complicated. So Lance, you're the history guy. Tell us a little bit about, in the opening, I said for nearly a century, so for almost 100 years, what makes a woman in sports has been a question. And people might be like, what are you talking about? What do you mean? No, it hasn't. But according to history, right? I mean, it's been going on for a while, ever since women really started to first compete in sports.
Well, you have the Olympic Games probably is where we want to start. And that is, it was in 1928 was the first time that the Olympics introduced women's categories to track and field events. And even back then, there was public speculation that some of the athletes were too masculine and that even men were posing as women in order to win. So that's where, for the most part, it gets started. You start to have those ideas that, is this what we want our women to participate in? But that was really the start, of all of that. And then then you get into, in the 1960s, there was a gold medal track and field athlete from Poland who was disqualified because at that point, the Olympics had gone to a chromosome test where it was reportedly found that she had a type of genetic mosaicism in which some cells carry a Y chromosome. And so there's a little bit, and then I stopped because at that point, we are currently in 2022 celebrating the 50th anniversary here in the United States of something called Title IX, which mandated that no one be excluded from participating in athletics due to their biological makeup. And I have been an advocate of that my entire life and have coached both boys and girls sports for over 35 years. So then we get into the idea of whether or not we should have genetic testing. And there was a challenge to that back in 1977 by Dr. Renee Richards, who was a transgender woman who sued the United States Tennis Association for requiring the chromosome test to compete in the women's category of the U.S. Open. She won her suit in the New York Supreme Court, and she played that year, 1977. At the age of 43, she was quickly eliminated in the singles tournament, but made it to the women's doubles final. Then in 1996 at the Olympics in Atlanta, 8 women failed the chromosome test because they all carried Y chromosomes. All were allowed to compete after it was shown that they had hormonal conditions that had prevented them from going through a typically male development. By the 2000 Olympics, international sports bodies had abandoned the chromosome test and reverted to ad hoc medical examinations. Sex tests based on testosterone began about a decade ago, so around 2010, after the South African track star Caster Semenya won the 800-meter race at the 2009 World Track and Field Championships by more than 2 seconds. Scrutinized for her strong physique, Semenya was forced to undergo examinations by an endocrinologist and a gynecologist, as well as a mental health assessment by a psychologist.
So the debate's been going on for a while, is the synopsis
for a
here.
long time.
And we've tried
different tests and different ways to come to the conclusion as where should this person compete.
And a couple of those examples are obviously about transgender women. However, I think it's very important to point out that a lot of those situations, especially some of the older ones, were with people who identified as a woman, right? And who were biologically born with female sex reproductive organs.
That's true.
So
yes.
These weren't even people. It's not like they were men who said, somebody who was born male biologically who said, I identify as a woman. We're not even talking about that. We're talking about people who were biologically born female who say, I feel like I am a female, who we have called into question and said, oh, well, despite that, we think that you're too whatever, based on whatever standard we were using at the time. So I think the next question, Lance, because you and I talked about this before the show, some people may be wondering, so, well, do I really know what a transgender person is? Let's make sure we get that out there, right?
Right. I think if you're going to discuss transgender athletes, then we all need to be working from the same definition, which we have talked about no matter what the issue is. If we don't all work from the same base, then it's impossible to have an honest and open conversation about it.
So per the Wall Street Journal article, it says that perhaps the only point of agreement between the two sides is that what it means to be transgender is widely misunderstood. A person is transgender if their gender identity does not align with the sex they were assigned at birth. Being transgender, however, does not necessarily mean that an individual wants to take gender-affirming hormones or undergo surgery. But notice the key there is does not necessarily. So they may do that. They may take hormones that make them more like the gender they feel they are, right? They may undergo surgery, but they don't necessarily do those things. And that, I think, it's not the only issue here, but I think that's a huge part of what people struggle with when they're talking about this. Because these are both, by the way, these articles are linked at thestateofus.org, and I would encourage people to read them because we just can't possibly give you all the detail that's in here. But one of the very valid points that is made, just scientifically, and lots of people on both sides will concede this because it just happens to be the truth, is that up until puberty, there's generally no good evidence to suggest that there's much competitive advantage one way or the other. It's when puberty kicks in and hormones start to come into play that things start to change. So, for example, one thing that becomes problematic is there are transgender people right now who went through puberty completely, right, and never took any kind of hormone suppression or altering hormone medications. They never did any of that. So they developed through puberty as whatever their biological sex was, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then there's this other class of people who took hormone suppression, right? Or medications that alter the levels of hormones in their body and did not develop along the predetermined biological track that they might have. And that's part of, again, trying to help people understand why this should for people be a complicated situation. Those are very different end results if we're just talking about the nature of your physicality in sports. Because one of the issues is that if you've gone through puberty, even if you're taking hormone suppression or you're altering your hormone levels after that, while yes, it's proven that, for example, a transgender woman, so somebody who was born biologically male at birth, but who identifies as a female, if they went through puberty as a male, right, and then started taking it after that, they may have gotten, for example, in swimming, they may have gotten taller, they may have gotten larger hands, larger feet, than they would have if they had been on hormone suppression. And that's part of why people can get into the weeds on this, because a single solution tends to overlook those nuances which are relevant if you're somebody who is just concerned with the competitive nature of sports. So we're going to continue to talk about the competitive nature of sports and what we might actually be able to do about this that is not discriminatory, whilst also trying to respect the competitive nature of sports and the value of a competitive-based sport. Keep it here on The State of Us, and we'll be right back. According to the most recent data collected in 2017, about 2% of Americans between the ages of 18 and 34 years old identify as transgender. By that standard, of the more than 7.9 million athletes who played high school sports during the 2018-2019 academic year, According to the most recent data from the National Federation of High School Associations, approximately 158,000 of those nearly 8 million would be transgender. So there's two ways of looking at it. One is it's a very tiny problem because there's really not that many. The other way is that 158,000 children is a sizable amount of children, and that ignoring those children one way or the other is probably not the best thing. So then it becomes, which is what we're trying to talk about, what can you do about this?
Off air, we talked about, merit-based in the workplace. If you can do the job better, then you should get the job, and maybe you should get better pay or better, benefits or whatever. That's what we want. We want that whole equality piece, right? That there's competition involved, right? I do the job better. I have a better skill set, or I studied harder, or I understand the ins and outs of the job, whatever it may be. So we argue for merit pay and merit-based in the workplace. Don't judge me because I'm male or a female. Just judge me on how well I do the job. Well, to me as a coach working with young people, that's exactly what athletics tries to teach them, tries to give them that opportunity. Now, can it also take place in the classroom? Yes, it can, which has been my coaching philosophy for 37 years, that my athletic field is my classroom. I'm teaching not only the ins and outs of the sport, but how to get the most out of yourself and to show you that the harder you work, the better the result.
I think the difference, and this is something that I mentioned before we came in to record too, that's interesting. I'm not posing it as an argument, just merely giving it to people to think about. We've been, as a society, pushing towards, and the majority of Americans believe, that your job, right, when you go to work, for most of us, that a man or a woman, regardless of who's applying, they should be paid based on how good of a job they can do, and their merit at the job, right? So if you're already doing the job, you should be paid requisite to your capabilities. If you're interviewing for a job, it shouldn't matter whether you're a male or female. It should just be based on, are you going to do the best job? Are you the best candidate for the job? Now, I think we all know in reality that we still have a ways to go on that because we're not there yet. There is a very real pay gap, and it's very present. And that's for people who sometimes are more capable, right? A woman who gets a job who might actually be doing a better job than a male counterpart who is actually getting paid less. And we've talked about there's a lot that goes into that. That's a separate conversation. The point in bringing that up is that's not what we do, though, in sports. There is the competitive nature of it, and the best athletes and the best competitors can win. However, it's a separated, segregated workplace. The women are over here and they're going to do their competition, and the men are over here and they're going to do their competition. And the reason this is an issue is because of, generally speaking, the people who were biologically male at birth who want to compete in women's athletics. Because Lance made this observation when we talked about this the other day. Interestingly, there's not a lot of concern about the biological females who wanted to go compete in male sports.
Well, because the key here is, as you pointed out, and I can give repeated anecdotal evidence as a coach, even of youth sports, of puberty being the key component. There are many times in races in elementary school where the girls are just as faster than the boys, or they can run further, or they can throw a ball further, or hit it just as far. Okay. Well, what happens in puberty? Well, it's that thing called testosterone. And testosterone is proven to make you stronger and to make faster. And in athletics, most of the time, those are two key components of how well you can compete against others, is how strong are you and how fast are you. And so when boys go through puberty and girls go through puberty. Boys get more testosterone, so they become stronger and faster. And then it's more difficult for the girls to compete head to head. Now, that to me was the answer, right? There's where you go. If you just we'll do this scientifically, we'll say, okay, you reach this level of testosterone and this allows you to compete as a female. If you're above that, you compete as a male. And actually, when you read the article, this was basically tested, but the results were never really publicly released. Okay. But the average testosterone in level in women, okay, this was another test, is below 3 nanomoles per liter, whereas in men, it typically ranges from 10 to 35 nanomoles per liter. And what was never released was the South African sprinter, Simenya, was forced to take hormones to lower her testosterone level to 10 nanomoles per liter so that she could compete. But then we have another study that was done that talks about the fact that when they tested in 2014, a study funded by the IOC and the World Anti-Doping Agency, researchers analyzed testosterone levels in nearly 700 elite athletes who played 15 different sports. The researchers found that 16.5% of men had low testosterone levels and 13.7% of women had high testosterone levels, with considerable overlap between the two groups. So now I don't know what to do, because I thought coming in, my answer was, well, we'll just go to the science and we'll agree on a testosterone level and say this will make it a level playing field. But the article points out that there's some difference there.
Because anecdotally, right, testosterone, well, not just anecdotally, we know that testosterone does play a role, but again, here, listen to the words, plays a role in physical strength and stamina, a big role, right? However, it is not, as some have contended, the only thing, which is why, as that study highlights, there are percentages of both populations where you may have a man that's capable that has slightly lower testosterone than another man who is not as capable.
But there's nothing in here that shows, and you can't convince me otherwise until you can find it, that in the sports that require strength and speed, testosterone levels matter.
And the answer is, right, most of the time, that is an easy way to make a determination, an accurate and easy way to make a determination. However, and that's part of the point of the study, which the study concludes that the IOC put together, it says the IOC definition of a woman as one who has a, quote, normal testosterone level is untenable. Because of that.
Which is why it blows my theory out of the water, so now I don't know what to do.
Right. Because of that 13.7% of women who again, these were women who identify as women, right? People who were born biologically female at birth, who from a gender standpoint also identify as female. 13.7% of them who compete, at an elite level over 15 different sports have high testosterone levels. And those are, quote unquote, always been women, right? I mean, and that's, by the way, that's not trying to be offensive in saying that. I'm just saying those are cisgender women, right? They identify as the same biological sex they were born at birth. They've always felt they're a woman. They're biologically female. And that percentage of them have that. So what to do about it? To find out, keep it here on The State of Us, and we'll be right back. What to do about transgender athletes, and really more holistically, Lance, which is the title of today's show, what to do about gender in sports.
I have a question for you, another conundrum for me. The definition that we're working under for transgender is someone who is born anatomically one gender, who feels they are a different gender.
Right. They are born anatomically as one sex, and they identify their gender different than their sex.
They identify their gender differently. Okay, here's the conundrum. Hypothetically, I'm born male. I feel like I'm a female. Now it's time for me to go to college. I can't get a scholarship as a male, but I have the right now to play in a women's tournament. I was a tennis player. And I win the tournament, and now a college wants to give me, because I identify as female, even though I take no drugs to suppress and I have no desire to take those drugs, just because I say I identify as a female, I am now going to take a scholarship away from someone who is cisgender. How does that equate to fairness and equality?
That's the issue that I have with a lot of the proposed solutions. They do not account, none of the solutions in my mind address all of the scenarios appropriately, except possibly for one. There was a decision, right, a number of years ago, that because everybody should be able to participate in sports, that even people who have some kind of disability ought to be able to participate in sports if they want to, which completely agree with.
I have coached a para-athlete. I coached a young person who played in the wheelchair tennis and went to the U.S. Open and finished in the top 2 or 3. And I actually am able-bodied, but I coached them. And I got to the point where he put me in a chair and I played against him.
How'd that go?
Well, I beat him because, one, I had some tennis skills, but 2, I had the ability to move body parts that they didn't have. So he would repeatedly get angry at me because I could lean back in the chair and keep my balance, which allowed me to hit balls. I could lean forward and hit balls that if he tried to do that, he would fall out of the chair. He didn't have the body control.
You can't do that.
Right. He couldn't physically do that. Okay. So therein lies my point, right? When we talk about, I speak from a place of, I've done that. Okay. I've worked in that realm, but as an able-bodied person, I had advantages. I had built-in advantages. And that I think applies as well to this transgender issue, which is why it's such a conundrum and I don't have the answer. This is one, like I said in the beginning, you're combining my 2 passions, the one of wanting equality for everyone and the love of athletics that I have and the beauty of competition.
Yes. So one solution that I think solves some of it off the bat is an assessment of sports, right? We've commissioned all these studies, spent all this money. Let's spend the money to do an analysis of the major sports in the world and make sure that any sport where there is no definitive conclusion, no, conclusive evidence to suggest that men or women have an advantage in the sport, do away with that sport being gendered. Now, obviously that doesn't address every sport, okay? I'm very aware of that because some of the sports that are contentious as part of this issue, like swimming, it's not going to address swimming, right? It's not going to address basketball, probably. Those are examples of sports it may not address. However, there are a lot of sports that are still gender-based that would address. And it just eliminates it. Well, now it doesn't matter, whether you're transgender or not, whether you're a male or female or not, it doesn't matter because there's no conclusive evidence to suggest that anybody has an advantage in this sport. So what do you do with something like swimming, right? Because that's the hot button one right now, right? That's where we have Lia Thomas, the transgender woman, who, is making the headlines and part of why this is a discussion. What do you do in something like that? Well, I'm going to tell you, Lance, because again, there's a lot of different ideas. I haven't heard this one talked about much, and it sort of stems from that separate contests idea, but still includes everybody. I recently being several months ago, started rowing, okay, which I've told you. I don't know if I've told listeners on the show. I was not familiar with the sport of rowing, right? The exercise of rowing, also in the United States, frequently called crew, depends on where you are in the world, but rowing, generally speaking, the athletic activity of rowing. So I have a water rowing machine that I row on. And one of the reasons I selected this particular one, and you all are welcome to look it up, this is not sponsored by them, I'm just sharing a personal experience. It's called Ergata, okay? And part of what intrigued me about this particular item was that it was a class-based system of working out, okay? So their whole concept was, we are going to assess your fitness level based on the things in rowing that tend to be the most important, right? For example, what is your split, your best split and your average split? What is your sustained ability to row for long periods of time, right? All things that are very analytic. They are just what they are, right? This is how fast I can row 500 meters. It's just what it is, right? It has nothing to do with, now, is it impacted by my gender? Sure. By my sex? Yes. Can I probably row better than a woman at a similar age in a similar level of fitness? Probably, but not always. And the interesting thing about this is it takes that component out of putting you into a class. So it just says, how good are you at this sport? And that is going to put you in a class. If you're the very, very best, the very top percentile, you're going to be in class 1, right? All the way down through 30 or 40 classes, depending on how skilled or not skilled at the sport you are, how good you are. And then you're going to compete against people in that class, right? So when I race, I compete against people who, in my case, are class 4 rowers. And by the way, I've looked because you can see who you compete with. I compete against people, Lance, that are 20 or 30 years older than me, okay, who are male, female. I compete with people that are younger than me because it's based on how good they are at doing this. And I compete against them, which guess what? That means that when I race these people, the race is pretty much neck and neck the whole frickin' time. You want to talk about competitive? I have not yet been in a race with these people where I felt like, this is a breeze. I've had to work my butt off because these people from a skill standpoint are almost identical to my skill set. So it's mental fortitude, right? How hard can I push? How hard am I willing to push? What will I do?
I have no problem with what you're saying, but that doesn't apply to state championships, professional athletics, the Olympics, because we don't group you by your skill level.
But why not?
Okay. Well, then that's
what I'm asking.
Then that's what you need to get to.
Is this a potential solution?
I totally understand, because you can take kids. I mean, I've had distance runners where the girls are just as good at the distance as the guys are, but that's on my team.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So I can give them similar workouts.
Correct.
Which is what you're talking about. But if we go to a meet or we go to the state meet, my girls can't compete in that class at the state meet with boys. They can compete on their team because we didn't have any great guy runners at that time. But when I had great guy runners, my best girl runners, distance runners, couldn't compete with my best boy distance runner. So I have no problem if you put them together by ability, but we don't do that when we go for the best at whatever level.
And what if we did?
Whether it's at the state level or the Olympic level or whatever, And if you're going to the Olympics or you're going to the pros, we've done it without the WNBA. There might be a woman or two, but they've tried and didn't make it in the NBA, which is why it was the push for the WNBA. So if you just do it by class, then what happens to the recognition, as it was brought up, and I know we're running out of time, but which was brought up in the article, the recognition of the people in the lower classes.
Mm-hmm.
In this case, it would be women's sports. But to go to your system that you've proposed, well, how many people would even pay attention to the lower classes?
To class 20, for example.
Right.
I mean, we might pay attention to class 1 through 5.
Right.
And you're probably going to see some, depending on the sport, because again, it does vary a lot. Basketball may be one where you see less overlap. Question is, would a class-based system improve the issue of gender in sports?
There you go. I like that. That's a good discussion. We have to have a follow-up show with that.
Yes. I think the answer is yes, that would improve the nature of gender in sports. However, to Lance's point, there's a host of other issues with sports that people are talking about totally separate from this, right? Already.
Right.
That don't have anything to do with whether you're transgender or male or female. It just has to do with, what about these sports that get less recognition? And what about, for example, the WNBA, a female version of the sport that gets less recognition? What should be done about that, right? So what do you guys think about, is there a better potential solution? There's probably something out there that we're not thinking of, right? But that's part of why we wanted to have this conversation, is to hear what you all think. So send us an email, podcast@thestateofus.org. And why did we have this conversation, Lance?
Well, because here at True Chat, we have a mission, and our mission is to have honest and open conversations about these kind of tough issues. And I think we've done that today. And hopefully you enjoyed today's show. Please send us your thoughts and concerns. Email us at podcast@thestateofus.org, and we'd be glad to share on the air what you have to say. We don't claim to have all the answers. We just ask the questions and then try to give you what we found out about it. And so this is the case today. If you like the show and you want to tell your friends about it and they say, well, where can we find it? We're on almost any app you can find, Spotify, Apple Podcast, any of them. Look us up, listen to us, and spread the word.
The State of Us is available as a podcast Tuesdays and Thursdays, first thing in the morning, and we're heard on AM and FM radio stations across the country on the weekends. For the State of Us on True Chat in Urbana, Ohio, I'm Justin T. Weller.
And not that I'm competitive, but I won again on the word of the day. I'm Lance Jackson.
And he's 30 years older than me. Not quite, but 20 plus years older than I am.
No, I think you're closer with the 30 plus.
Well, I was being generous.
I appreciate that.
And you whooped my butt in this competition, so.
Yeah, but it didn't have anything to do with physical strength.
Right. Yeah, that's fair. Thank you all very much for tuning in. We'll see you next time. Be the change. Be sure to check out our website, thestateofus.org, for books, articles, and all the ways to tune in. thestateofus.org.